Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're taking what is arguably the most magical, poetic experience of the human condition, falling in love, and, well, we're putting it right under the microscope. We're going to look at how millions of years of evolution have literally wired your brain for romance. We are going to take all that beautiful poetry and translate it into the sophisticated biological and psychological process that it actually is. Because, as it turns out, love isn't just magic. It's this meticulously crafted system shaped by reward circuits, survival mechanisms, and a whole lot of hormones. Let's dive in.
Picture this. You've got two strangers making eye contact in a busy train station. Neither one of them is expecting anything crazy to happen, right? But in just a fraction of a second, that one single, fleeting glance picks off a massive chain reaction that completely rewires human neurochemistry. Before you even consciously register the color of their eyes, your brain starts firing off signals that can honestly alter the course of your entire life. It sparks this immediate cascade of memory, emotion, and deep attachment. But how exactly does that happen?
Well, let's start with Section 1, the spark and survival, focusing on the evolution of love.
You see, love actually started out as a strict biological necessity. Early human infants were born with these massive, highly complex brains, which meant they were incredibly vulnerable. Unlike, say, a baby horse that's up and walking just a few hours after birth, human babies need a massive amount of resources, calories, time, and protection for well over a decade just to survive. So evolution had to solve a very practical problem. How do you keep two independent adults stuck together long enough to raise this incredibly demanding child? The solution? Create a drive so powerful and so intoxicating that it virtually bound them together. Love is, quite literally, nature's ultimate survival superglue.
Moving right along to Section 2, the brain's chemistry lab, where we dive into the neuroscience of attraction.
Okay, so when you meet someone and you instantly get those nervous flutters, or you find yourself agonizing over exactly when they're going to text back, you aren't just feeling romance. What you're actually experiencing is the activation of your ventral tegmental area, or the VTA for short. This is a super primitive, ancient part of your brain's reward circuit, and what's really fascinating is that the VTA sits right alongside the neural regions that control basic survival drives, like thirst and hunger. This perfectly explains why early love feels like an absolute intense necessity, and why going through a terrible breakup can literally make you lose your appetite. Your brain is processing this person as a vital resource for your survival. Crazy, right?
Now, think of this early phase like a highly specific neurological cocktail. First up, we've got dopamine. That acts as the instigator, basically flooding your system to create that intense excitement and, honestly, that relentless obsession you feel in the early days. Next, oxytocin. You've probably heard it called the cuddle hormone. Steps in to build deep trust and long-term emotional attachment. And then there's cortisol, the stress hormone. It sounds completely backward, but early love literally triggers a stress response in your body, which is exactly what gives you those nervous, flittering butterflies before a first date. When you put all this together, this specific neurochemical mapping makes early-stage love act and look very much like clinical addiction in the brain. It is a very real, very powerful physiological high.
Which brings us to Section 3, the subconscious selection. Let's look at the psychology of attraction.
Attraction is, ultimately, this fascinating and sometimes kind of hilarious tug of war between our logical, rational minds and our ancient biological drives. You might have this very sensible, conscious mental spreadsheet of exactly what you want in a partner. Someone who loves golden retrievers, has high emotional intelligence, and shares your exact values. But, silently, running in the background, your unconscious brain is actually the one running the show. It is heavily swayed by evolutionary metrics like subtle facial symmetry or the mere exposure effect, which basically just means we tend to like people we see more often, and a deep-seated sense of childhood familiarity. Your brain is silently evaluating hundreds of these subconscious data points before you've even made the conscious decision to walk over and say hello.
And science has actually proven over and over just how structured this subconscious process really is. For example, Helen Fisher famously put people who were madly in love inside fMRI scanners, and she literally mapped out those exact reward circuits lighting up like a Christmas tree. Then there's Arthur Aaron's famous 36 questions that lead to love. Aaron proved that highly structured, escalating vulnerability can actually manufacture deep intimacy right there in a sterile laboratory setting. You start with a simple question like, who would be your ideal dinner guest? But by question 36, you're sharing deep personal fears. It essentially hacks the brain's trust systems. And underlying all of this is attachment theory, which reveals how the very first bonds we formed as helpless infants heavily dictate our romantic behaviors as adults today.
Let's shift gears to Section 4, the pain and the pixels. We're talking heartbreak and digital dating.
Listen, if you have ever felt heartbreak, you know it physically hurts. And that is not just some poetic metaphor. Brain scans objectively show that romantic rejection and physical pain, like literally burning your hand on a hot stove, light up the exact same regions in our brain, specifically areas like the anterior cingulate cortex. Why? Because to our evolutionary ancestors, being rejected and isolated from your primary bond or your tribe meant facing the wilderness completely alone. It meant certain death. So your brain processes the loss of a deeply attached love as a literal, life-threatening physical injury. It sounds the exact same biological alarm.
Now think about today. This ancient survival mechanism is trying to navigate completely unprecedented terrain. I mean, we're endlessly swiping through hundreds of faces on a Thursday night from the couch, dealing with just immense choice overload. The environment of dating has totally changed, but here's the kicker. Our internal software hasn't been updated in a million years. Modern technology simply triggers our prehistoric bonding systems without replacing them. We are essentially trying to navigate a high-tech, infinite choice digital dating world with a brain that evolved to select a single partner from a tiny, close-knit hunter-gatherer tribe. When you look at it that way, it makes total sense why modern swipe culture can feel so uniquely exhausting.
Finally, we arrive at Section 5, the architecture of forever, the science of lasting love.
So as that initial dopamine-fueled chemical rush inevitably starts to fade, and honestly, neurobiologically, it absolutely has to fade just so we can function and focus on anything else, relationships have to transition if they're going to survive. Relationship science tells us that long-term love is really the antidote to the chaos of early romance. It relies on daily, active, evidence-based habits. It requires intentionally cultivating deep emotional safety to replace all that early anxiety. It demands active listening and vulnerability, but perhaps the most surprising insight here is about conflict repair. The data shows that successful long-term couples don't actually fight less than unsuccessful ones. It's not about achieving some magical Zen state with zero arguments. It's all about how quickly, effectively, and kindly you repair the bond and bridge the gap immediately after the argument happens. It all ultimately comes down to this really powerful realization. The brain might ignite love, but every lasting relationship is ultimately written by the choices two people make together. While neuroscience does a beautiful job explaining the spark, the dopamine, the VTA, those evolutionary imperatives, we aren't just biological robots running on an ancient script. We are the conscious architects of our own lasting bonds.
So, I'll leave you with this to chew on. Knowing the science behind the spark, what daily choices will you make to write your own lasting love story? Understanding the deeply ingrained biology of love, well, it doesn't strip away the romance at all. If anything, knowing it took millions of years of evolution just so you could feel that connection, that makes the whole experience feel even more extraordinary. Think about that the next time you feel those butterflies. Keep questioning, keep learning, and as always, thank you so much for exploring this with me today.